Get ready for a deep dive into a case that really sent shockwaves through a community. Thanksgiving week, 2003, Pennsauken, New Jersey. It's like,
Yeah,
you picture a quiet town, the kind of place where people feel safe,
right.
secure.
Yeah.
But that sense of security was shattered when a young woman named Sharita Williams disappeared.
Yeah, it's a chilling reminder that even in those seemingly peaceful places, darkness can lurk. And in this deep dive, we're going to unpack all the events surrounding Sharita's disappearance and the investigation that followed.
Now, before we get into the details of the case itself, can you give us a sense of who Sharita was?
Yeah, so from all accounts, Sharita Williams, affectionately known as Sunshine by her family, was a bright, bubbly teenager, a loved daughter, sister, friend. And her disappearance, I mean, it really just sent shockwaves through the community.
You mentioned that her disappearance happened during Thanksgiving week, and I understand it was specifically on Black Friday.
That's right.
So that must have added another layer of complexity to the investigation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Black Friday, with its massive crowds, heightened activity, it's a very chaotic environment. It made witness identification really difficult, and it potentially obscured crucial evidence.
So let's talk about the moment when the alarm bells started ringing. When did Sharita's family realize something was terribly wrong?
It was her mother, Wilma, who first sensed that something was amiss. She had this unshakable feeling that she needed to go back to the 36th Street Bridge.
Okay, hold on. Why don't we pause there for a second? That detail about Wilma being drawn to the bridge is really intriguing.
Right.
It's almost like a mother's intuition.
It really is. It's fascinating how sometimes our subconscious mind picks up on things that our conscious mind hasn't processed yet.
Right.
And in Wilma's case, that gut feeling led her to a horrifying discovery.
She found Sharita's body.
Yes, under the 36th Street Bridge. And I mean, imagine the terror and grief that Wilma must have felt at that moment. It's almost unimaginable.
It's just heartbreaking. And what's even more disturbing is that instead of receiving immediate support and comfort, the suspicion fell on her and her husband, Harry. Can you explain why that happened?
So in cases like this, where the person who reports the missing person is also the one who discovers the body, it raises some red flags for law enforcement. It's not uncommon for perpetrators, especially when it involves family members, to kind of insert themselves into the investigation.
Right.
Sometimes even staging the discovery.
So the police were working under the assumption that Harry and Wilma might have been trying to cover something up.
Exactly. They were looking for any inconsistencies in their stories, anything that might suggest their involvement.
Yeah.
And they even subjected Wilma to a voice stress analyzer test.
Oh, wow. Can you tell us a little more about this voice stress analyzer? What's the science behind it, and why is its reliability so debated?
Yeah, so the theory behind voice stress analysis is that when someone's lying, their voice undergoes these subtle, often undetectable changes. Frequency, microtremors, and the device picks up on these changes. However, there's a lot of scientific debate about its accuracy, with many experts arguing it's really not a reliable indicator of deception.
So using it in a case as sensitive as this one, especially on a grieving mother, seems questionable at best.
For sure. It raises those ethical considerations about the potential impact on individuals who are already going through immense trauma.
Yeah.
So while it's crucial for investigators to be thorough, it's equally important to be sensitive to the well-being of the victim's loved ones.
Absolutely. It must have been agonizing for Wilma to have just discovered her daughter's body and then be treated as a potential suspect. What was her reaction to all of this?
Well, according to Harry, Wilma was devastated by the accusations.
Right.
The police interrogation, the voice stress analyzer, it all left her feeling deeply betrayed and completely misunderstood.
It's just another layer of tragedy on top of an already horrific situation.
Absolutely. While the voice stress analysis did eventually clear Wilma, that initial suspicion definitely cast a shadow over the family, and it definitely complicated those early stages of the investigation.
So let's shift our focus back to the investigation itself. What were some of the key pieces of evidence that emerged early on in the case?
Well, at the crime scene, they found Sharita's underwear discarded nearby, which suggested a possible struggle or a hasty attempt to get rid of evidence.
Okay.
And they also found a receipt from Model's Sporting Goods.
Okay.
And this was a really chilling discovery because the bags that were used to suffocate Sharita were traced back to that store.
So the receipt was a potential lead. Did it help narrow down the search at all?
It held some promise, but there was a major setback. The surveillance cameras at the Models were malfunctioning that day.
Oh, no.
Black Friday, remember?
Right, of course, yeah.
Yeah, And the huge crowds of shoppers just made it impossible to get any reliable eyewitness account of someone buying those specific bags.
So it sounds like every lead was hitting a dead end. Was there any other evidence that could potentially point investigators in the right direction?
There was one piece of evidence that was both crucial and heartbreaking. On Sharita's cell phone, investigators found a very chilling audio recording.
Oh, wow.
It captured the sounds of Sharita pleading with someone to stop hitting her.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just this gut-wrenching piece of evidence that confirmed the brutality of the attack.
Yeah.
And it gave them a possible link to her killer.
Do we know who she was with that night or where she was headed before she disappeared?
So Sharita had told her friends that she was going to see a young man named Greg who lived across the 36th Street Bridge in Camden. She apparently had a crush on him and had gone over to his house that night.
So Greg immediately became a person of interest.
Of course, investigators focused their attention on Greg. When they initially questioned him, his mother claimed that Sharita had been there, but she'd turned her away because Greg was sleeping and didn't want to be disturbed.
That's a little odd. Was his story corroborated at all?
Not really, no. As investigators dug deeper, they found inconsistencies in Greg's account.
Okay.
He claimed to have been sleeping, unable to answer Sharita's repeated calls, but phone records showed that he'd answered other calls that night.
So he was lying, but why? What was he trying to hide?
That was the million-dollar question. He was lying about his contact with Sharita on the night of her murder, which immediately put him under intense scrutiny.
And then there's the forensic evidence. I understand they found DNA that seemed like it would crack the case wide open.
They did, yeah. During the forensic examination of Sharita's clothing, they discovered a semen stain on her jeans. And this was huge because it offered a potential direct link to the perpetrator through DNA.
This was back in 2003. Was DNA technology as advanced then as it is today?
It's definitely on the rise, but not as widely used or sophisticated as it is today. But it was still a powerful tool. And in this case, it seemed like the answer was just a DNA test away.
Did they compare the sample to Greg's DNA?
They did. He gave a sample, but the results came back negative. It wasn't a match.
So if it wasn't Greg, then who was it?
They ran the DNA profile through CODIS, the National DNA Database, but initially there were no matches.
Wow.
So the case went cold, leaving the investigators and, more importantly, Sharita's family in this agonizing limbo.
And that's where the story takes a really emotional turn.
It does.
Because not only was the case unsolved, but the cloud of suspicion still hung over Sharita's parents.
Absolutely. Imagine that weight, grieving the loss of their daughter while simultaneously fighting to clear their names and find her true killer. Just an unbearable burden.
Yeah. Did they ever find any peace during those years when the case was cold?
Harry, Sharita's father, described those years as agonizing.
Right.
The whispers, the accusations, the constant wondering. He even mentioned how people would stare at them in the grocery store.
Oh, gosh.
Whispering behind their backs.
Wow.
And even their son faced suspicion from teachers and classmates.
So the ripple effects of this crime extended far beyond the immediate victims. It reached into the very fabric of their lives and their community.
Exactly. It highlights the devastating and often overlooked impact of rumors and speculation in cases like this. And it's a reminder that while pursuing justice is paramount, we have to also be mindful of the damage caused by unfounded accusations.
Did Harry ever give up hope that they would find his daughter's killer?
Absolutely not. His persistence is really a testament to a father's love.
Yeah.
He refused to let the world forget about his daughter or the injustice of her murder. He called the lead investigator, Martin Wolf, every Monday religiously just to make sure that they were still actively working the case.
Wow, that's incredible. His determination is truly inspiring.
You know what? His efforts, the dedication of the investigators, it paid off. After 3 long years, they finally got a hit on that DNA sample.
Wait, they did? Who was it?
That's where we'll pick up in part 2. You'll have to stay tuned. The identity of that DNA match and the twists and turns that follow, I think, are really going to leave you stunned.
Okay, I am on the edge of my seat here. After 3 years of waiting, the DNA database finally provides a match. Who was it?
The DNA from Sharita Williams' genes belonged to a man named Warren Dixon.
Warren Dixon. Okay, what can you tell us about him? Did he have any connection to Sharita or her family?
So as investigators started digging into Dixon's background, they uncovered some pretty unsettling connections. He was a low-level drug dealer who had recently been convicted on a drug charge in Philadelphia. But here's where it gets really interesting. He had attended the same high school as Sharita and had vanished shortly after her murder.
So not only did his DNA match the sample from the crime scene, but There were also these circumstantial links tying him to Sharita and the time frame of her disappearance. This must have been a huge turning point in the investigation. What did the police do with this information?
It was a big breakthrough, for sure. And remember Harry, Sharita's father. He had mentioned hearing rumors about Dixon bragging about getting away with murder. Of course, at the time, he didn't know who the victim was. But with this new information, those rumors took on a whole new meaning.
Wow. So there were whispers circulating in the community that potentially pointed to Dixon's involvement even before the DNA match. That's incredible. Did the police investigate these rumors further?
Oh, yeah. They definitely followed up on those leads, interviewing people who had heard those rumors, trying to piece together a timeline of Dixon's activities and, potential connections to Sharita. But, rumors alone don't make a case. They needed concrete evidence to link Dick into the crime.
Of course they needed something more substantial to go on. How did they go about building a case against Dixon with this new information?
So investigators started retracing Dixon's steps on the night of Sharita's murder. And remember how the receipt from Model's Sporting Goods was found near the crime scene? Well, they were able to link that purchase to Dixon, placing him in the vicinity of the bridge around the time of Sharita's death. They also discovered that Dixon's mother lived very close to the crime scene, which, further strengthened that connection.
Okay, so they had the DNA match, they had the receipt placing him near the bridge, and they had his mother's residence in close proximity to the crime scene. That's starting to look like a pretty compelling case. What was Dixon's reaction when the police confronted him with all of this evidence?
Well, when they brought him in for questioning, he initially denied any involvement in Sharita's death. He even tried to explain the presence of his DNA on her genes by claiming that they had been romantically involved.
He claimed to have had a relationship with her. That seems like a pretty desperate attempt to deflect suspicion. Did he provide any details to support this claim?
Yeah, he told police that he had given Sharita the black bandana that was found tied around her neck, suggesting some level of intimacy. But investigators quickly saw through this fabricated story. His claims didn't line up with the evidence they had gathered, and his demeanor during the interrogation was, well, it raised some red flags.
It sounds like he was trying to paint a picture of a consensual relationship to explain away the DNA evidence, but the investigators weren't buying it. Was there a specific moment during the interrogation where his story started to unravel?
There was this one really pivotal moment where Dixon slipped up and made a crucial admission. He asked the investigators, if I killed her by accident, would I still have to go to jail?
Wow, he actually said that. He was acknowledging his involvement in her death, even while trying to frame it as an accident. I can only imagine how the investigators must have reacted to that.
Oh, you can bet that statement raised some eyebrows.
Yeah.
It was a major turning point in the interrogation. It was an incriminating statement that gave the investigators the leverage they needed to press him further.
What happened next? Did he confess to the murder?
He didn't offer a full confession at that point, but that accidental death claim really opened up a new line of questioning. Remember that chilling audio recording from Sharita's phone where she's pleading with someone to stop hitting her? Well, that recording completely contradicted Dixon's claim of an accidental death.
Right. The recording indicated a struggle, a violent attack. It seems like his attempt to portray the death as accidental completely backfired. Did investigators confront him with this discrepancy?
They laid out all the evidence, piece by piece, highlighting the inconsistencies in his story, the DNA match, the receipt, his mother's proximity to the crime scene, the rumors, the bandana, and of course the audio recording.
So with all this evidence stacked against him, what was his next move?
Well, faced with mounting evidence and realizing that his attempts to deflect blame were failing, Dixon's attorney approached the prosecutors with a plea deal.
A plea deal? What were the terms?
They offered him 10 years in prison in exchange for a guilty plea to manslaughter.
10 years. That doesn't seem like a lot of time, considering the brutality of the crime and the years of anguish Sharita's family endured while the case remained unsolved.
The prosecutors felt the same way. They countered with 20 years, and eventually a deal was struck.
So 20 years for taking a young life. What was the Williams family's reaction to this plea deal?
It was mixed emotions for them. There was relief that Dixon was finally being held accountable for his actions, but also deep frustration that he wouldn't face a more severe punishment. Harry, especially, felt that 20 years wasn't nearly enough for the pain and suffering Dixon had caused. He was really hoping for a life sentence.
I can understand their frustration. It must have felt like a compromise, a bittersweet victory. Did they ever get an explanation from the prosecutors about why they agreed to the plea deal?
They did. The prosecutors explained that plea deals are often a complex calculation. They have to take into account the strength of the evidence, the likelihood of a conviction at trial, and the potential for appeals. They also expressed concerns about the judge assigned to the case, fearing he might be lenient on Dixon, potentially resulting in an even shorter sentence if they went to trial.
So the plea deal, in their eyes, was a way to ensure that Dixon served at least some time for his crime, even if it wasn't the full extent of what they believed he deserved. It's a difficult decision, weighing the desire for a harsher sentence against the uncertainty of a trial. Did Dixon's confession as part of the plea deal shed any light on what happened that night or his motivations for killing Sharita?
Unfortunately, no. In his confession, Dixon admitted to having sex with Sharita without her consent and then a struggle ensuing. But when pressed for details about the murder itself, he simply claimed that his mind went blank.
His mind went blank. That's a chillingly vague explanation. It leaves so many questions unanswered. It must have been incredibly frustrating for the Williams family to hear that and still not fully understand why their daughter was taken from them.
It was devastating. They finally had their daughter's killer behind bars, but they were left with this gaping hole in their understanding of the events that led to her death. The why remained a painful mystery.
The Williams family story is truly heartbreaking. They endured so much pain, uncertainty, and ultimately a sense of incomplete justice.
It's a stark reminder that even when the legal process reaches a conclusion, the emotional scars can run deep.
You know, we've been going through all the twists and turns of this case, and it's been one of the most emotionally charged deep dives we've ever done. We learned that Warren Dixon, the man whose DNA was on Sharita's genes, accepted that plea deal, confessing to manslaughter and receiving a 20-year sentence.
Yeah, and it's a case that just raises so many questions about justice and closure, especially for families who've experienced these kinds of violent crimes. Even when there's a legal revolution, it often feels so incomplete. There's this longing for answers that sometimes never come.
Right, and in this case, Dixon's explanation, or should I say lack thereof, leaves us grappling with that why. You know, he admits to the assault, the struggle, but then he says his mind went blank. It feels like a very convenient way to avoid taking full responsibility for his actions.
Yeah, it's definitely frustrating. We see this in so many cases where you can analyze all the evidence and try to speculate on motives, but sometimes the perpetrator's true intentions just remain a mystery. And for the victims' families, that lack of a clear explanation, I mean, that can be just incredibly difficult to process.
It's like a puzzle with a missing piece. They know who did it, but the motivation, the driving force behind the violence, it just remains elusive. It must have been incredibly painful for the Williams family to hear Dixon's confession and still not fully understand, why he took their daughter's life.
Absolutely. It's like a wound that just can't fully heal. Just a constant ache of unanswered questions. The why becomes this heavy burden, a source of just ongoing torment, really.
From what we've learned about Harry Williams, he seems incredibly strong and resilient, but, even the strongest people have breaking points. How did he and his family cope with this profound loss and the uncertainty around Sharita's death?
Harry has talked about the impact that Sharita's murder had on his family. He says that Black Friday is a day that's now forever tainted by grief, a painful reminder of the day that their lives were changed. And he's also shared how he visits Sharita's grave regularly, talks to her, and keeps her memory alive in his own way. It's really a testament to that enduring power of love and the need to find solace, even in the face of just unimaginable tragedy.
Yeah, it speaks to the resilience of the human spirit, that ability to find ways to honor loved ones even when they're no longer with us. It's also a reminder that grief comes in many forms, and there's no right or wrong way to navigate the pain of loss.
And in this case, Harry's grief wasn't just a private matter.
Yeah.
He took his pain and channeled it into action. He became an advocate for his daughter and other victims of violent crimes. He shared his story publicly, raised awareness about the impact of violence and the importance of, seeking justice for victims.
That's incredible. He took this personal tragedy and transformed it into a force for positive change. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's always potential for growth and to find purpose even in the face of adversity.
For sure. Harry's story really highlights the power of using your voice to advocate for change, to support others who are going through similar experiences, and to ensure that, the memory of those we've lost are never forgotten.
So for our listeners, what can we take away from this deep dive into the Sharita Williams case? It's a story filled with heartbreak and frustration and a sense of incomplete justice, but it's also a story of resilience and love and the power of using your voice to advocate for change.
This case really underscores the importance of remembering the victims and not just the perpetrators. Sharita Williams, a young woman full of life and potential, was robbed of her future, and it's crucial to honor her memory, to acknowledge the effects of this crime on her family and her community, and really, strive to create a world where tragedies like this are less frequent.
We've gone through the intricacies of the investigation and the complexities of that plea deal and the emotional toll on the Williams family. But at the heart of it, this is a story about human lives, about the enduring power of love and the importance of seeking justice, even when it feels impossible. It's a story that stays with you long after the details have faded, and it's a reminder that behind every case file, every headline, there are real people grappling with a profound loss and, an enduring search for meaning.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope that it sparked some reflection and even maybe inspired some action. The fight for justice, for understanding, for a world free from violence continues. And, in the words of Harry Williams, we must never forget the victims and the enduring impact these crimes have on their families and their communities.
We hope you'll join us again next time for another deep dive into a topic that matters. Until then, keep listening, keep learning, and keep the conversation going.